It was supposed to be the perfect end to a perfect day. Colonel David Thompson had just watched his youngest daughter graduate from college with honors. The pride in his chest felt warm as he drove through the quiet streets of his hometown Oakville. After 20 years in the Army, moments like these reminded him why he served his country. The small town looked exactly the same as when he was growing up here. Same old oak trees lining the streets. Same mom-and-pop shops downtown. Same friendly faces waving from their front porches. David had come a long way from this place, but it would always be home. He was thinking about calling his wife to tell her about the ceremony when he noticed the police car in his rearview mirror. The red and blue lights started flashing, and David felt his stomach drop. He wasn't speeding. He was actually driving below the speed limit, being extra careful because he was in an unfamiliar rental car. David pulled over to the side of Elm Street, a residential road he'd walked down thousands of times as a kid. He turned off the engine and placed his hands on the steering wheel, just like he'd taught his own kids to do during traffic stops. Stay calm, be respectful, follow instructions. That's what good citizens do. Officer Rick Martinez stepped out of his patrol car with an attitude that made David immediately uncomfortable. Martinez had been with the Oakville Police Department for 15 years, and in that time, he'd built quite a reputation. Not the good kind. The officer walked up to David's window with heavy steps, his hand resting on his belt. His face was already twisted into a scowl before he even reached the car. David rolled down his window and offered a polite smile. "Good evening, officer. Was I doing something wrong?" Martinez looked David up and down with obvious disgust. "License and registration, now." David kept his voice calm and friendly. "Of course, sir. May I ask what I did wrong? I thought I was following all the traffic laws." "Don't get smart with me," Martinez snapped. "Just give me your papers." David slowly reached for his wallet, making sure to announce every movement. "I'm reaching for my wallet now. It's in my back pocket." This was basic safety protocol that every military member learned. Clear communication prevents misunderstandings. As David handed over his license, Martinez snatched it away roughly. He studied the military ID that was clearly visible in David's wallet. "What's this supposed to be?" Martinez asked, pointing at the ID with obvious suspicion. "That's my military identification, sir. I'm an active duty Army colonel stationed at the Pentagon." Martinez let out a harsh laugh. "Yeah, right. And I'm the president. You people always trying to pull some scam." David felt his blood run cold. "You people." He'd heard those words before, usually right before something bad happened, but he kept his voice steady and respectful. "Sir, I can assure you that identification is legitimate. If you'd like to verify it, you can contact—" "Shut up," Martinez shouted, causing several neighbors to come out onto their porches. "Get out of the car, now!" David's heart started racing, but he complied. He'd been in combat situations that felt less dangerous than this traffic stop. As he stepped out of the car, he kept his hands visible and moved slowly. "Sir, I'm confused about why you stopped me. I wasn't speeding, and I haven't done anything wrong." Martinez pushed David against the side of the car, causing several neighbors to gasp. Mrs. Chen, who lived across the street, recognized David immediately. She'd known him since he was 10 years old, had watched him grow up to become one of the most respected young men in town. "David," she called out from her porch, "is everything okay?" "Stay back, ma'am," Martinez yelled at her. "This is police business." But Mrs. Chen wasn't easily intimidated. She'd lived through enough in her 78 years to know when something wasn't right. She pulled out her phone and started recording, just like her grandson had taught her. To do, Martinez was getting more aggressive by the minute. He patted David down roughly, far more forcefully than necessary. David had been through hundreds of security checks in his military career, and none of them had felt this hostile. "You got any weapons on you?" Martinez demanded. "No, sir. I'm unarmed. Any drugs, anything illegal?" "No, sir, nothing illegal." Martinez searched the rental car with unnecessary roughness, throwing papers around and slamming doors. He was clearly looking for any excuse to escalate the situation further. By now, more neighbors had come outside. Word was spreading quickly through the tight-knit community. David Thompson was home and something was very wrong. These were people who'd known David his whole life. They'd cheered for him at high school football games. They'd celebrated when he got accepted to West Point. They'd prayed for his safety during his deployments overseas. Mr. Rodriguez, who lived next door to David's childhood home, couldn't believe what he was seeing. "That's Colonel Thompson," he told his wife. "Something's not right here." The crowd was growing, and Martinez was getting nervous. But instead of de-escalating the situation like he was trained to do, he doubled down on his aggressive approach. "All of you get back," he shouted at the neighbors. "This man is under investigation." David tried one more time to reason with the officer. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm a United States Army colonel. I was just driving home from my daughter's graduation. If you could just check my identification." "Stop lying," Martinez screamed. "People like you don't become colonels. You're probably some gang member trying to impersonate military personnel." The words hit David like a physical blow. 20 years of service to his country. 2 Bronze Stars, a master's degree, dozens of commendations for leadership and service. And this officer was calling him a gang member based on nothing but the color of his skin. Mrs. Chen was still recording everything on her phone. Her hands were shaking with anger, but she kept the camera steady. She'd seen enough injustice in her lifetime to know this was something the whole world needed to see. Other neighbors were pulling out their phones too. In 2024, everyone knew that recording police encounters could be the difference between justice and injustice. The same technology that connected the world was about to shine a very bright light on a very dark moment. Martinez seemed to realize he was being filmed, but instead of backing down, he became even more hostile. "Put those phones away. This is a police investigation." But the neighbors weren't backing down either. They knew David Thompson, they knew what kind of man he was, and they weren't going to let him be treated like this in his own hometown. The situation was spiraling out of control, and everyone present could feel it. What had started as a simple traffic stop was becoming something much bigger. Something that would soon capture the attention of the entire country. As Martinez continued his aggressive behavior, David maintained his military bearing. He answered every question respectfully. He followed every command precisely. He never raised his voice or showed any sign of aggression. His training had prepared him for hostile situations, but nothing had prepared him for being treated like a criminal in his own hometown. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to serving and protecting his country, being treated like a threat by someone who was supposed to serve and protect his community. Mrs. Chen's phone kept recording. Mr. Rodriguez called his son, who worked for the local newspaper. Word was spreading through social media even as the incident was still happening. Within minutes, dozens of people knew that something terrible was happening on Elm Street. And this was just the beginning. What happened next would shock the nation and force everyone to confront some uncomfortable truths about respect, service, and justice in America. The perfect day that had started with a graduation ceremony was about to become a moment that changed everything. The situation on Elm Street was getting worse by the minute. Officer Martinez seemed to feed off the growing crowd of neighbors, becoming more aggressive as more people gathered to watch. What should have been a simple traffic stop was turning into a public spectacle. "Get on your knees," Martinez shouted at Colonel Thompson, his voice carrying across the quiet residential street. David felt his world tilt. In 20 years of military service, he had never been spoken to with such disrespect. He had commanded hundreds of soldiers, briefed generals, and represented his country in sensitive diplomatic situations. But here he was, being ordered to kneel on the asphalt like a criminal. "Sir, I don't understand why that's necessary." David said calmly, "I've been completely cooperative. I said get on your knees." Martinez screamed, his face red with anger. The neighbors watching from their porches and front yards were stunned. Mrs. Chen, still recording on her phone, felt tears running down her cheeks. She had watched David grow up. She remembered when he came home from West Point in his crisp uniform, how proud his parents had been. She remembered the day he left for his first deployment, how the whole neighborhood had gathered to wish him well. David looked around at the faces he'd known, his whole life. These were people who had supported him through every milestone. They had sent him care packages when he was overseas. They had celebrated his promotions and worried about his safety during dangerous assignments. With quiet dignity, David slowly lowered himself to his knees on the cold pavement. The simple act sent shockwaves through the crowd. Here was a decorated war hero, a leader of men being forced to kneel on a public street for no apparent reason. Martinez wasn't finished. He seemed energized by David's compliance, as if breaking down this distinguished officer was some kind of victory. "Hands behind your back," he commanded. David complied, his military training taking over. "Follow orders, de-escalate the situation, protect civilians." Even when those civilians included himself, his instincts were to avoid making things worse. Mr. Rodriguez couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Officer, this is Colonel Thompson. He grew up right here on this street. There must be some mistake." Martinez spun around to face the crowd. "All of you shut up and mind your own business. This man is a suspect in a criminal investigation." "What crime?" called out another neighbor. "Driving while being a war hero?" The sarcasm in the voice made Martinez even angrier. He turned back to David, who was still kneeling with his hands behind his back, maintaining perfect military posture even in this humiliating position. "So you think you're some kind of hero?" Martinez sneered. "Let me guess, you bought that fake military ID online? Thought it would get you out of trouble?" David's voice remained steady and respectful. "Sir, my identification is genuine. I've served my country for 20 years. If you would just run a background check." "Stop with the lies," Martinez interrupted. "You expect me to believe someone like you became a colonel in the real military? Give me a break." The words stung more than David wanted to admit. He had worked twice as hard as many of his peers to reach his current rank. He had excelled in every assignment, earned advanced degrees, and proven himself in combat situations. Yet here was this officer dismissing all of that based purely on prejudice. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had taught David in elementary school, stepped forward from the crowd. Her voice shook with emotion as she spoke. "That young man has served this country with honor for 20 years. He's got medals for bravery, he's saved lives, and you're treating him like garbage on his own street." Martinez pointed an accusing finger at her. "Ma'am, you need to step back before I arrest you for interfering with a police investigation." But Mrs. Patterson had taught middle school for 40 years. She wasn't intimidated by bullies, even ones with badges. "Investigation of what? What exactly do you think he did?" Martinez couldn't answer because there was no good answer. He had pulled David over for no legitimate reason, and everyone present knew it. The crowd was getting restless, and more people were arriving as word spread through the neighborhood. David's phone started buzzing in his pocket. His daughter was probably calling to thank him for coming to her graduation. His wife was likely wondering when he'd be home. But he couldn't answer. He was kneeling on a street in his hometown, being treated like a criminal while his neighbors watched in horror. A teenage boy in the crowd held up his phone. "This is going viral," he announced. "I've got like 50 people sharing this already." Martinez's eyes went wide. Going viral was the last thing he wanted. But instead of backing down, he made the worst possible decision. He reached for his radio. "I need backup on Elm Street," he called in. "I've got a suspect resisting arrest in a hostile crowd." The neighbors exchanged confused glances. Resisting arrest? David hadn't resisted anything. He had been nothing but polite and cooperative from the very beginning. Within minutes, 2 more police cars arrived. Officers Johnson and Kelly stepped out, immediately sensing the tension in the air. They looked at David kneeling on the ground, then at the crowd of upset neighbors, then at Martinez, who was clearly agitated. Officer Johnson, a 20-year veteran, with a reputation for fairness, approached Martinez quietly. "What's the situation here, Rick?" "Traffic stop gone bad," Martinez replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Suspect was speeding, gave me fake military identification, and started getting aggressive with me." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Several people started shouting at once, calling out Martinez's lies. David remained silent, knowing that anything he said would only make things worse. Officer Kelly, meanwhile, was looking at David with confusion. Something about this didn't add up. The man kneeling on the ground didn't look like someone who had been aggressive. His posture was perfect, his compliance complete. Kelly had seen enough real criminals to know the difference. "Sir," Kelly said to David, "what's your version of what happened here?" Before David could answer, Martinez jumped in. "Don't listen to him. He's been lying since the beginning." But Kelly held up a hand to silence Martinez. "I asked him, not you." David raised his head slightly, making eye contact with Officer Kelly. "Sir, I was driving home from my daughter's graduation ceremony. I was pulled over, though I'm not sure why. When I showed my identification, Officer Martinez became hostile and accused me of having fake military credentials." Kelly studied David's face. There was something about his bearing, his manner of speaking, that suggested he was telling the truth. "You said military credentials?" "Yes, sir. I'm an active-duty Army colonel stationed at the Pentagon." Officer Johnson stepped forward. "Can I see your identification?" Martinez tried to interfere. "I already checked it, it's fake." But Johnson ignored him, extending his hand toward David. "May I?" David reached slowly for his wallet, announcing his movements as he had been trained. Johnson examined the military ID carefully, then looked at David's driver's license, then back at the military ID. "This looks legitimate to me," Johnson said quietly to Kelly. Martinez was growing desperate. "They make fake IDs all the time. You can't trust—" "Rick," Johnson cut him off, his voice carrying a warning. "Why don't you go check on your vehicle while we sort this out?" It was a polite way of telling Martinez to back off, and everyone present understood the message. Johnson turned back to David. "Colonel Thompson, I'm going to ask you to stand up. We need to figure out what happened here." As David rose to his feet, brushing dirt off his knees, the crowd let out a collective sigh of relief. But the damage was already done. A decorated military officer had been humiliated in front of his own community, and it had all been captured on multiple cell phones. Mrs. Chen was still recording, her phone battery running low from the extended filming. She had documented everything, and she knew this video would not stay in Oakville. The world needed to see what had happened to David Thompson. The teenage boy who had mentioned the video going viral was right. His social media post had already been shared hundreds of times, and the numbers were climbing rapidly. The Oakville incident was beginning to trend, and the story was spreading far beyond the boundaries of the small town. As more backup officers arrived and the situation gradually came under control, everyone present understood that this was no longer just a local incident. This was something that would soon capture national attention and force uncomfortable conversations about justice, respect, and the treatment of those who serve their country. The humiliation was over, but the real story was just beginning. By the time Colonel Thompson was finally allowed to leave Elm Street, the video had already traveled far beyond Oakville's town limits. Mrs. Chen had posted her footage on her Facebook page, simply writing, "This is wrong. Everyone needs to see what happened to David today." What she didn't expect was how quickly those words would prove prophetic. Within 2 hours, the video had been shared over 1,000 times. Mrs. Chen's phone kept buzzing with notifications. Friends, family members, and complete strangers were commenting, sharing, and expressing their outrage at what they had witnessed. The teenager who had filmed from another angle had uploaded his version to TikTok with the caption, "Decorated War. Hero treated like criminal in his own hometown. This is America?" That video exploded even faster, reaching 50,000 views in the first hour. By midnight, local news stations were calling Mrs. Chen's house. Her grandson had to help her navigate the sudden media attention, setting up interviews and explaining what had happened from her perspective as a longtime neighbor who had watched David grow up. "I've known that boy since he was 10 years old," she told the first reporter who interviewed her. "He used to help me carry groceries. He mowed lawns for elderly neighbors. When he got into West Point, the whole neighborhood celebrated. We've watched him serve our country with honor for 20 years. And this is how he gets treated when he comes home?" The emotion in her voice resonated with viewers across the country. This wasn't just about a traffic stop gone wrong. This was about a community watching one of their own sons being disrespected and humiliated for no reason. The story gained momentum throughout the night. Military blogs picked it up first, sharing David's impressive service record that they had quickly researched. Bronze Star with Valor, Combat Action Badge, 2 successful deployments to Afghanistan, Master's degree in International Relations, from Georgetown, currently serving as a strategic planning officer at the Pentagon, with a top-secret security clearance. Veteran organizations across the country began sharing the story with their networks. The Veterans of Foreign Wars posted it on their official page. The American Legion included it in their morning newsletter. Military families who understood the sacrifice and dedication required to reach the rank of colonel were particularly outraged. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, a military affairs commentator, was one of the first experts to weigh in on national television. "What we're seeing here is the intersection of 2 serious issues," she explained to viewers. First, the ongoing problem of racial profiling in law enforcement. Second, and equally disturbing, is the complete lack of respect shown to a highly decorated military officer who has dedicated his life to serving this country. The contrast in the videos was stark and undeniable. On one side, you had Officer Martinez, aggressive and hostile from the very beginning. On the other, you had Colonel Thompson, calm and respectful throughout the entire encounter, even while being humiliated in front of his own community. Social media users began sharing their own stories of similar encounters. Active duty military members posted about times they had been profiled or disrespected while in civilian clothes. Veterans shared experiences of having their service questioned or dismissed. The hashtag #DocRespectOurService began trending alongside the Oakville incident. But it wasn't just military communities rallying around David's story. People from all walks of life were sharing the video, expressing their shock at what they witnessed. Many commented on David's dignity throughout the ordeal, how he never lost his composure even while being treated so poorly. By Tuesday morning, the story had reached the mainstream media. CNN featured it in their morning news roundup. The Today Show dedicated a segment to discussing police-military relations. Fox News brought on several veteran advocates to discuss the incident. The Oakville Police Department was completely unprepared for the media storm that descended on their small town. Chief Patricia Williams, who had been on the job for only 6 months, found herself fielding calls from reporters across the country. Her initial statement was cautious and defensive. The Oakville Police Department is reviewing the incident that occurred on Elm Street. We take all complaints seriously and will conduct a thorough investigation. But the public wasn't satisfied with bureaucratic language. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability. And they wanted it now. David himself had remained mostly quiet since the incident, following the advice of military lawyers who were now involved in the case. But his silence only added to the public interest in his story. Who was this man who had maintained such dignity under such circumstances? Reporters began digging into his background, and what they found only made the story more compelling. David had grown up in a working-class family in Oakville. His father had worked at the local factory for 30 years. His mother had been a school secretary. Neither parent had gone to college, but they had sacrificed everything to support their son's dreams. His high school football coach, now retired, remembered him as a dedicated student athlete who never got in trouble. His teachers remembered a polite, hard-working young man who always helped other students. His West Point classmates remembered a natural leader who treated everyone with respect regardless of their background. The story of his military career was equally impressive. He had volunteered for difficult assignments. He had mentored younger officers. He had earned the respect of his superiors and subordinates alike. His performance evaluations, parts of which were made public with his permission, consistently rated him as an exceptional officer with unlimited potential. "This is a man who has dedicated his entire adult life to serving others," said retired General Patricia Hayes, who had worked with David at the Pentagon. "He has represented our country with honor and distinction. The idea that he would be treated like a criminal in his own hometown is absolutely unacceptable." The story was picking up international attention as well. Military allies around the world were taking notice. The British military newspaper Stars and Stripes picked up the story. Canadian military blogs shared it with commentary about respect for military service members. Meanwhile, back in Oakville, The community was dealing with the aftermath of sudden national attention. Reporters were interviewing neighbors, business owners, and local officials. The small town that had been largely anonymous was now in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Many longtime residents were embarrassed by the negative attention their town was receiving. They knew this wasn't representative of their community values. They had always been proud of David Thompson and other local residents who had served in the military. A group of neighbors organized a support rally for David, planning to gather in the town square to show their solidarity. The event, initially planned for maybe 50 people, began attracting attention from veteran groups across the region. What started as a small local gathering was turning into something much bigger. Officer Martinez, meanwhile, had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. His union representative released a statement defending his actions, claiming he had followed proper procedures during a routine traffic stop. But the video evidence made that defense difficult to maintain. By Wednesday, the story had reached the Pentagon. Military officials were beginning to take notice of the treatment of one of their own officers. Phone calls were being made. Meetings were being scheduled. The United States military does not forget about its own, especially when they are mistreated, while representing the service with honor. The viral video had accomplished something that bureaucratic complaints and formal processes often fail to achieve. It had forced everyone involved to confront what had happened on Elm Street, and it had made that confrontation public, immediate, and undeniable. What started as Mrs. Chen's Facebook post about something being wrong had become a national conversation about respect, service, and accountability. The small town incident was about to attract the attention of some very powerful people who had the authority to demand answers and ensure that justice was served. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. Thursday morning at the Pentagon started like any other day, until Secretary of Defense Jennifer Morrison watched the Oakville video during her morning briefing. What she saw made her blood boil. Secretary Morrison had served 30 years in the Air Force before taking on her civilian role. She had broken barriers as one of the first women to command a fighter squadron, and she understood what it meant to earn respect through service and dedication. Watching Colonel Thompson be humiliated on that video struck her personally and professionally. "Get me Colonel Thompson on the phone," she told her aide. "Right now." The call came through to David's Pentagon office at 8:47 a.m. He had been trying to focus on his normal duties, reviewing strategic planning documents and preparing for briefings, but the events of the past few days had made concentration nearly impossible. "Colonel Thompson, this is Secretary Morrison. I want you to know that I've seen the video from Oakville and I am absolutely appalled by what happened to you." David was stunned. The Secretary of Defense was calling him personally? "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your concern." "This is more than concern, Colonel. This is about respect for the uniform and everything it represents. No officer under my command should ever be treated the way you were treated. Period." Secretary Morrison's next move surprised everyone in the building. She called an emergency staff meeting with the Joint Chiefs, something typically reserved for matters of national security. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, addressing the highest-ranking military officials in the country, "one of our officers was publicly humiliated and disrespected while representing this institution. This is not just about Colonel Thompson. This is about every man and woman who wears the uniform." General Robert Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, had already reviewed the incident file. "Ma'am, I agree completely. The treatment of Colonel Thompson was unacceptable by any standard. What actions are you recommending?" What happened next was unprecedented in recent military history. Secretary Morrison authorized a full Pentagon response that would send shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across the country. First, she ordered the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office to release an official statement. But this wasn't going to be typical bureaucratic language. She wrote much of it herself. The statement read, "The Department of Defense is deeply disturbed by the treatment of Colonel David Thompson in Oakville. Colonel Thompson is a highly decorated officer with an exemplary record of service to his country. The disrespectful and unprofessional treatment he received is completely unacceptable and does not reflect the values we expect from those who serve our communities." But the statement was just the beginning. Secretary Morrison then made a decision that sent ripples through the entire defense establishment. She suspended all Department of Defense cooperation agreements with the Oakville Police Department, effective immediately. This meant no more military equipment transfers, no more joint training exercises, no more access to federal law enforcement databases, no more participation in regional security conferences. The Pentagon was essentially cutting off all ties with Oakville until the situation was resolved. The announcement hit the Oakville Police Department like a thunderbolt. Chief Williams received the notification and immediately understood the implications. Her small department relied heavily on federal cooperation for everything from equipment to training. This suspension would cripple their operations. But the Pentagon wasn't finished. Secretary Morrison authorized military investigators to travel to Oakville to conduct their own review of the incident. This team wasn't just going to accept the local police department's version of events. They were going to interview witnesses, review evidence, and prepare their own report. General Hayes took it upon himself to call every major military installation in the region. Within hours, base commanders across 3 states had been briefed on the situation. The message was clear. The military takes care of its own. The response from military bases was immediate and overwhelming. Fort Campbell issued a statement of support. Norfolk Naval Base shared Colonel Thompson's story with their personnel. Air Force bases across the region posted messages on their official social media accounts expressing solidarity with their fellow service member. Retired military officers began speaking out publicly. General Patricia Martinez, a decorated veteran of 3 wars, appeared on CNN to discuss the incident. "What happened to Colonel Thompson is a disgrace," she said firmly. "This man has served his country with distinction for 2 decades. He has earned the respect that was denied to him on that street in Oakville. The Pentagon's response is appropriate and necessary." The military press was equally supportive. The Army Times ran a front-page story about the incident. The Military Times published an editorial calling for accountability. Stars and Stripes featured Colonel Thompson's service record, highlighting his achievements and contributions. Military families across the country were sharing their own stories of similar encounters. The spouse of a Navy SEAL posted about her husband being questioned when he tried to use his military discount at a store. An Air Force pilot shared his experience of being asked to prove his identity when picking up his children from school in uniform. Secretary Morrison wasn't content to just issue statements and suspend cooperation. She decided to make the Pentagon's position even clearer by scheduling a press conference for Friday afternoon. The Pentagon briefing room was packed with reporters from around the world. Secretary Morrison stepped up to the podium with the confidence of someone who had commanded respect her entire career. "Colonel David Thompson represents the very best of American military service," she began. "His treatment in Oakville was not just an insult to him personally, but to every man and woman who has ever worn the uniform of the United States military." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The Department of Defense will not tolerate the mistreatment of our personnel. We will use every resource at our disposal to ensure that our service members are treated with the respect they have earned through their sacrifice and dedication." A reporter raised her hand. "Madam Secretary, some critics are saying the Pentagon is overreacting to what was essentially a local police matter." Secretary Morrison's response was immediate and firm. "There is no such thing as overreacting when it comes to defending our people." Colonel Thompson was not just representing himself in that moment. He was representing every value we hold dear in the military: honor, integrity, and service to country. The press conference continued for 30 minutes, with Secretary Morrison fielding questions about military-civilian relations, respect for service members, and the Pentagon's expectations for law enforcement agencies that interact with military personnel. Behind the scenes, the Pentagon's response was having exactly the effect Secretary Morrison intended. Law enforcement agencies across the country were taking notice. Police chiefs were reviewing their officers' training on interactions with military personnel. Departments that had similar cooperation agreements with the Pentagon were reassessing their policies and procedures. The message was clear. The United States military would not stand by and watch its people be disrespected. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Secretary Morrison was asked about Colonel Thompson personally. "I have had the privilege of reviewing Colonel Thompson's service record," she said. "This is an officer who has dedicated his life to serving others. He has led troops in combat. He has mentored young soldiers. He has represented our country with distinction in sensitive diplomatic roles. The idea that his character and integrity would be questioned by anyone is offensive to every person who understands what military service really means." The room fell silent as she continued. Colonel Thompson maintained his dignity and professionalism throughout that entire encounter, even while being treated with complete disrespect. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what real leadership looks like. That is what military bearing means. And that is why the Pentagon will always defend officers like Colonel Thompson. By Friday evening, the Pentagon's response had changed the entire narrative of the story. This was no longer just about a bad traffic stop in a small town. This was about institutional respect, military values, and the responsibility of leadership to defend those who serve. The ball was now in Oakville's court. The Pentagon had made its position crystal clear. The world was watching. And everyone was waiting to see how the small-town police department would respond to pressure from the most powerful military organization in the world. The Pentagon had fired back, and their message was unmistakable. "You don't mess with our people." The pressure on Oakville was unlike anything the small town had ever experienced. By Saturday morning, the police department's phone lines were jammed with calls from reporters, military advocates, and concerned citizens from across the country. Chief Williams hadn't slept properly in 3 days. The Pentagon's response had changed everything. When the most powerful military organization in the world suspends all cooperation with your department, you pay attention. When the Secretary of Defense personally calls out your officer's behavior, you take action. Chief Williams knew she was at a crossroads. She had been brought in 6 months earlier to reform a department that had struggled with community relations. She had plans for gradual change, but Officer Martinez's actions had forced her hand. There was no time for gradual anymore. The first decision was the easiest one to make. At 9 a.m. Saturday morning, Officer Martinez was called into headquarters. Chief Williams didn't waste time with small talk. "Rick, your actions on Elm Street were completely unacceptable. You violated department policy, you ignored basic training, and you embarrassed this entire organization. Your employment with the Oakville Police Department is terminated, effective immediately." Martinez tried to defend himself, claiming he had followed proper procedures, but Chief Williams cut him off. "I've reviewed the video evidence multiple times. There were no proper procedures followed. You turned a routine traffic stop into a national incident through your unprofessional behavior. The termination was announced publicly within an hour. But Chief Williams knew that firing one officer wasn't going to be enough to restore trust or satisfy the Pentagon's demands for accountability. Her next move was more difficult, but equally necessary. She called Mayor Patricia Johnson to discuss the department's relationship with the community. "Patricia, we need to do more than just fire Martinez. We need to completely overhaul how this department operates." Mayor Johnson, who had been fielding angry calls from citizens and pressure from city council members, agreed completely. "What do you need from me?" Chief Williams had been developing a comprehensive reform plan since taking the job. The Martinez incident had just accelerated her timeline. "I need funding for complete retraining of all officers. I need new policies for traffic stops. I need community oversight. And I need your full support when people complain about the changes." The mayor didn't hesitate. "You have it. Whatever it takes to make sure this never happens again." Chief Williams also knew she needed to reach out to Colonel Thompson directly. This wasn't something that could be handled through official channels or press releases. It required a personal touch. The phone call was difficult, but necessary. "Colonel Thompson, this is Chief Williams from the Oakville Police Department. I want to personally apologize for how you were treated by my officer. There is no excuse for what happened, and I take full responsibility for failing to prevent it." David was gracious in his response, as those who knew him would have expected. "Chief Williams, I appreciate your call. I hope we can use this situation to make positive changes that benefit everyone." "That's exactly what I intend to do, sir." Would you be willing to work with me on developing new training procedures for our officers? Your military experience with leadership and de-escalation could be invaluable. It was an unexpected request, but David agreed to consider it. The idea of turning his negative experience into something positive for the community appealed to him. The Pentagon was monitoring the situation closely. Secretary Morrison's office received regular updates on the police department's response. When they learned about Martinez's termination and the chief's reform plans, the initial reaction was positive but cautious. "It's a good start, Secretary," Morrison told her staff, "but we need to see sustained action, not just crisis management." The military investigators who had been sent to Oakville submitted their report the following Tuesday. Their findings were scathing regarding Martinez's behavior, but complimentary toward Colonel Thompson's professionalism throughout the encounter. The report included recommendations that went beyond the immediate incident. It suggested mandatory training for all law enforcement agencies that interact with military personnel. It proposed standardized procedures for verifying military credentials. It recommended regular community outreach between police departments and local veteran organizations. Secretary Morrison decided to use the Pentagon's influence to push for these broader changes. She authorized the creation of a military-civilian liaison program that would work with police departments across the country to improve relationships between law enforcement and military communities. The first pilot program was established in Oakville. Chief Williams embraced the opportunity to be a model for other departments. She worked directly with Colonel Thompson to develop new training protocols. Every officer in the department was required to complete 40 hours of additional training on cultural sensitivity, de-escalation techniques, and proper procedures for verifying identification. The department also established a civilian review board with representatives from the military community. Retired Colonel James Peterson, who lived just outside Oakville, agreed to serve as the first chairman. "What happened to David Thompson was unacceptable," Peterson said during the board's first meeting, "but what's encouraging is how the community has responded. Real change is happening here." The changes weren't just procedural. Chief Williams hired 2 new officers who were military veterans. She established partnerships with local veteran organizations. She instituted monthly community meetings where residents could discuss concerns directly with police leadership. The Pentagon gradually began to take notice of these changes. The military investigators returned to Oakville 6 months later and found a completely transformed department. Their follow-up report praised the comprehensive reforms and recommended that the cooperation suspension be lifted. Secretary Morrison made the announcement personally. "The Oakville Police Department has demonstrated genuine commitment to change and accountability. The Department of Defense is resuming all cooperation agreements, effective immediately." But the impact of the incident extended far beyond Oakville. Police departments across the country had taken notice of what happened when military personnel were mistreated. Many began reviewing their own policies and procedures. The military community had also learned important lessons. The Pentagon's swift and strong response had sent a clear message that military leadership would defend their people. Service members across all branches felt more confident that their institutions would support them if they faced similar situations. Colonel Thompson returned to his duties at the Pentagon with renewed respect from his colleagues and superiors. His handling of the situation had actually enhanced his reputation within the military community. Secretary Morrison personally commended him for maintaining his professionalism throughout the ordeal. A year later, Colonel Thompson was promoted to Brigadier General, becoming one of the youngest officers to achieve that rank. While the promotion was based on his exceptional service record, many believed his grace under pressure in Oakville had demonstrated the kind of character the military valued in its senior leaders. The incident also sparked broader conversations about respect and service in American society. Military families shared their stories more openly. Law enforcement agencies examined their own biases and procedures. Communities across the country held discussions about how to better honor those who serve. Mrs. Chen, whose video had started the entire chain of events, was invited to speak at several community events about the importance of standing up for what's right. "I just filmed what I saw," she would tell audiences. "Sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference." The teenage boy who had uploaded the video to social media used his platform to advocate for military families and police reform. His original video had been viewed over 10 million times, making him an unexpected voice for social change. Officer Martinez, meanwhile, struggled to find employment in law enforcement. His termination from Oakville followed him to every application. He eventually left the field entirely, taking a job in private security where his actions had fewer consequences for the communities he was supposed to serve. Chief Williams became a national expert on police-military relations, speaking at conferences and training sessions across the country. Her transformation of the Oakville Police Department became a case study, taught at police academies and military leadership schools. The small town of Oakville found itself in an unusual position. What had started as an embarrassing national incident had become a success story of accountability and reform. Other communities began sending delegations to study their approach to military-civilian relations. Most importantly, the changes were lasting. 3 years after the incident, the Oakville Police Department had not had a single complaint of misconduct from military personnel. Community trust had been rebuilt through consistent action and transparent leadership. Colonel Thompson, now General Thompson, occasionally returned to Oakville for community events. He would often visit Mrs. Chen, who had become something of a local celebrity for her role in exposing injustice. They would sit on her porch, drinking tea and talking about how much the town had changed.